Hello everyone, this is part 2 of What If Naruto Had to Prove Himself, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Hey, are you okay, Naruto? The blonde ninja paused mid-stretch and threw her a confused look. Yeah, I'm fine, he said bluntly. He frowned. Why wouldn't I be? Well, you Pink crept into Hinata's face as her voice trailed off. Hesitating a moment, she timidly lifted a finger to gesture at her head. Oh, he barked with a chuckle. That. He grinned as his hand went up to scratch at the same spot in his spiky blonde hair. Don't worry about that, I'm used to it by now. Hinata smiled in relief and gave a small giggle. Flashback. Outside the Hokage's tower, Naruto's and Lee's face-off had grown more and more intense until it felt like the atmosphere around them would burst into flames. Finally, their muscles tensed and they each began to let loose a battle cry. At that moment, Sakura and Tenten intervened, clobbering their respective teammates in the back of the head. Instantly both boys' faces were planted in the dirt at their feet, limbs twitching painfully. Oh, no you don't. Sakura scolded, her face twisted in pure if silly rage. Not right here in the street. What are you thinking? Shouted Tenten, her expression a mirror of Sakura's. If you're going to fight, take it to the training grounds. Heaving a sigh and rolling his eyes, Neji bent down to help his friend up. After staring in open-mouthed shock for a long moment, Hinata hastily knelt to do the same for Naruto. The two ninja were barely on their feet again when they glanced at each other, smirked with mischief, and tore off in a blur toward their chosen battlefield. Neither had said, first one there wins. But the challenge was on. Behind them, the rest of their friends blinked against the resulting dust cloud and sputtered a few coughs. Then, after throwing exasperated looks at each other, they followed at a quick but not quite so reckless pace. End flashback. Lee had finished stretching and stood across the field waiting patiently. Aware of this, Hinata fidgeted nervously, clearly wanting to say something. Naruto looked at her expectantly. Gee, good luck, Naruto. I know you can do it. She blurted finally. Well thanks, Hinata, he said cheerfully, side grin solidly in place. That's all I needed to hear. Now I can't lose. Before she could even begin to blush, she stiffened with surprise as Naruto stepped closer and gave her a quick peck on the cheek. Just like clockwork, thought Naruto, pleased with himself as he watched the pink rise to her face, pink that quickly turned crimson at the sound of a catcalling whistle that had to be from Kiba. Reddening slightly himself, Naruto resolved to force-feed his friend Akamaru's dog food later. Blushing furiously, Hinata resolved to slip some of Akamaru's worst dog food into her teammate's dinner sometime. She blinked at her own uncharacteristic thought. Where did that come from? By silent agreement, Lee and Naruto had chosen a mid-sized, level field almost entirely surrounded by trees. There were no grasses or weeds taller than their ankles, and neither were there any gullies or ditches in evidence. Footing wouldn't be a problem. It was also a fair distance away from any other training area currently in use, so the odds for interruption were slim. Perfect. Hinata now hurried off to join the others at the fringe of the trees as the two combatants moved to face off. They came to a stop 10 paces apart, directly in the center of the field. The sun was beginning its descent towards the horizon, but the afternoon was still young. For a long moment, the young men regarded each other in silence. Then Naruto smiled confidently. Are you sure about this, bushy brow? He called. You know how strong I am. You sure you don't just want to give up and save me the trouble of beating you? Lee aped his smile. You have defeated many scared opponents. That is true. However, let us see how you will do in a fight where you are clearly outmatched. His voice held the same eager intensity it always did. Naruto snorted derisively and prepared to throw back a contradiction to this assessment, but before he could say a word, Lee interrupted. For you see, Lee continued, a gleam in his eye turning his smile into a smug one, there is one special rule in this battle. You may use any ninjutsu or genjutsu you wish to assist you, but any damage you inflict including the knockout must be dealt with taijutsu. Naruto managed to force his side grin to remain in place despite his stomach folding in on itself. Great, he said with every ounce of enthusiasm he did not feel. Great, he groaned inwardly. Granted, his own melee skills were nothing to laugh at. He liked to think he'd grown quite formidable over the years, but his real strength was the incredible stamina he possessed that allowed him to use powerful, chakra-intensive jutsu. And Lee was a taijutsu master. All he knew was physical combat, and he knew it very well. Losing genjutsu didn't bother Naruto. He didn't know any, but how on earth could Naruto expect to win without his ninjutsu? He shook his head slightly to clear it. That was a bad way of thinking about it. He had to win, and so he would. Setting his confidence, he assumed his fighting stance. Across from him, Lee wordlessly did the same. The world seemed to grow silent, the wind SD, and even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. Neither combatant budged an inch for an eternal moment. Then someone on the sidelines, clearly impatient to start the match, thoughtfully hurled a kunai between them. In the instant it broke their eye contact, Lee sprang into motion. The battle was begun. Leaf whirlwind, he cried, leaping into the air and spinning into his signature flying roundhouse kick. Naruto grinned and threw his arms up high right to block and catch the leg. How thoughtful of Bushibraw to announce his attack like that. Before he even connected, however, Lee twisted in midair, orienting his body upside down and bringing his other foot down in a vertical kick on Naruto's head. Caught off guard, Naruto barely managed to get his left forearm up in time. He felt the blow connect solidly and breathed silent thanks that he'd worn his plated braces. With his right hand, he tried to fire off a punch into Lee's midsection, but the other boy pushed off with his leg against Naruto's arm and flipped away from it. Catching his fall on his hands, the taijutsu master expertly whirled his body around, leveling out horizontally as he moved to sweep his legs through Naruto's. The blonde ninja hopped backwards, avoiding the maneuver, but almost instantly Lee planted his feet and, continuing the rotation of the sweep, came up and forward in a rising punch. Naruto, still in midair, twisted to his left, using that hand to shove Lee's fist out of line. He tried to catch hold of the arm, but Lee was already spinning away from his grab. Both boys landed on a large patch of dirt and skidded a couple of feet further apart, facing each other with equal expressions of appreciation. The kunai finished vibrating in the trunk of the tree it had struck. The two combatants rushed forward again, each juking left and right seemingly at random to mask their angles of approach. The instant they met, Naruto threw a quick 1-2 combo of a high right jab into a low left hook. Lee merely shifted his head to avoid the jab before blocking the heavier punch with a forearm. Shoving the fist away, he threw a amazingly fast left kick at his opponent's head, but when it swept through empty air he just as swiftly drew it back to catch a knee with his shin even as his right hand shot forward in a palm thrust, blocking one with his left simultaneously. Locked in place for an instant, the combatants shoved off each other, flying back a foot or two before immediately jumping back into the fray. The shinobi slammed together in a furious hail of blows too rapid for anyone present to follow. There was no time for thinking. Punches and kicks lashed out on instinct even as battle hardened, lightning-fast reflexes kept both ninja flowing around, against, in tandem with the other's movements. It was like watching an intricate dance where one false step could spell disaster for its participants. The air seemed to shimmer as fist and foot slashed through it even as the ground seemed to quake under the force of every impact. For a long time, neither seemed to gain any headway. Then suddenly Naruto, stamp feigning a back step, threw himself to the right. Lee, taken in, rocketed past him. Before Bushibraw could correct for his mistake, Naruto finally managed to catch hold of his arm. Chakra instantly gathered in his other palm, a Rasengan instinctively swirling into existence, but Naruto hitched. Gah! No ninjutsu. The split second of distraction proved to be too long. He felt his jaw rocked by Lee's palm, shaking his hold, and the freed arm shot out into his stomach just before Lee planted another blow squarely on his face. Naruto stumbled back awkwardly. His opponent leapt forward to capitalize on his opening. The blonde trickster flashed a grin before abruptly falling backwards before Lee's onslaught. As Bushibraw's momentum carried him overhead, Naruto kicked with both legs straight up. Lee twisted in midair to minimize the damage, but Naruto was nevertheless rewarded with a semi-solid impact on the nimble shinobi's ribs. The triumphant shout on his lips melted into a cry of surprise, however, when Lee clamped an arm over his legs and, with a mighty effort, swung the prone ninja off the ground and hurled him into the air. Naruto barely had time to arrest his wild tumbling before he felt Lee slide into place just below him, between him and the ground. He stiffened. Dancing leaf shadow. Not good. He knew Lee wasn't preparing to use the lotus. That technique was forbidden, but that hardly helped the situation. He'd seen from countless examples that someone performing the maneuver could strike at their victim with impunity while remaining practically untouchable. It took expert maneuvering to shake free, and Bushy Brow certainly wasn't going to give him the time to do it. Gritting his teeth, Naruto readied himself for the onslaught. Because he couldn't see where the blows were coming from, Naruto had to concentrate on reacting in the moment Lee's hand or foot came into view. And they came from everywhere. Displaying amazing aerial agility, Bushy Brow varied his strikes with systematic precision designed to keep the blonde ninja constantly twisting back and forth without stop. The only advantage was that Lee's own proximity, combined with his whirling maneuvers, prevented him from effectively attacking his victim's unprotected back. Even so, though Naruto handled himself masterfully, he only managed to intercept about one of every 4 strikes. A flight of several seconds passed like several hours under the assault. As their heads began to orient toward the grassy field and their fall picked up speed, Naruto saw a fist coming in from the left and instinctively rolled to his right. And planted his nose in Lee's knee. His head rebounded only to be hammered from behind. Simultaneously, the knee clipped his shoulder, spinning him toward facing the ground only to catch another punch square on his forehead protector. At the end of this abuse, Lee was falling head first almost vertically while Naruto was poised to perform a belly flop on the turf. The battered ninja forced his eyes open against the smarting pain in time to see his opponent land on his hands, remaining perfectly erect. Grasping what the older boy intended with a jerk of realization, Naruto swung his own legs down and barely managed to connect with Lee's calves, tipping the taijutsu master over and forcing him to flip away, before landing heavily and awkwardly himself. If he'd seen or reacted to it a fraction of a second later, Naruto would have taken the full force of the landing through Lee's rigid heels digging into his stomach. That would not have felt good. They faced each other, once again in their fighting stances. Judging by Lee's appearance, the casual observer wouldn't know the battle had even started. Naruto's breath came with slight effort, he tasted blood he knew trickled from his nose, and his body was suffering from countless new aches, but he wasn't concerned. He hadn't even gotten halfway through his first wind yet, let alone his second. But that didn't mean things were looking good. Lee had been right. In terms of pure fighting SK, he was far outmatched here. It was taking every ounce of grit he had just to keep up with the martial master. If only he could use his jutsu. He blinked. Wait a minute, he mentally reviewed the match rule as Lee had described it, then resisted the urge to slap his forehead, instead throwing up his favorite hand sign. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Suddenly 24 Naruto lookalikes shimmered into existence, all sharing the original's predatory grin. He couldn't believe he hadn't thought of it before. Being a ninjutsu, he'd thrown his shadow cloning out of consideration from the start. But his clones used taijutsu too, didn't they? He saw Lee smile and nod approvingly, as if he'd been expecting this. Never one to disappoint, the Uzumaki army charged. For the next several minutes, Lee fought like the beasts he and his sensei always claimed they were. He whirled in a frenzy of activity, intercepting attacks from every angle in every direction even as he delivered his own. Here he tripped a duplicate and hurled it over his shoulder to intercept an incoming punch even as he leapt forward in a kick to the face of the next copy in line. Here he planted his feet on one clone's chest and flipped off over the heads of the crowd, blocking a dozen blows with his arms and lashing a foot out at an inattentive copy, sending the unfortunate duplicate tumbling into the group of Narutos behind him. Practically every motion the taijutsu master made sent at least one shadow clone to its doom in a puff of smoke. Yet every time his forces dwindled, the real Naruto withdrew from the fight long enough to replenish his clones before leaping back into the fray. Eventually, overwhelming numbers won out, Bushy Brow began to slow a fraction, and a fraction was enough. Unable to react quite in time, Lee took a punch squarely to the cheekbone, knocking him off his feet. The Narutos pounced. Like a pinball, Bushy Brow was punched and kicked from clone to clone toward the edge of the crowd, where a roundhouse punch from the original sent him tumbling out into the field. All of Naruto's lookalikes ambled up beside him casually, each of them reflecting his look of satisfaction. Displaying sturdy resilience, Lee got up without trouble, though his posture suggested he was suffering from several new aches not dissimilar to those he'd given Naruto. He turned to his opponent, smiled with appreciation, and began to stretch. That was a good warm-up. Now it is time to get serious. Abruptly, Bushy Brow sat on the ground and whipped off his orange leg warmers. Grasping his intentions immediately, an alarmed Naruto rushed with his whole army in a frantic charge to stop the other ninja. Too late. Lee finished unbuckling the weights on his legs and, standing quickly, hurled them at his attackers. The deceptively small weight packs were amazingly dense. Each of them plowed through 6 or 7 clones without slowing down at all. One splintered a tree trunk at the edge of the field before coming to rest. The rest of the stunned Narutos finally forced their attention back to Lee. Bushy Brow smirked and waved politely before disappearing into thin air. Within fractions of a second from each other, every remaining duplicate abruptly exploded in sequence, leading up to the real one being slammed off his feet. Naruto rolled when he hit the ground, immediately getting back to his feet. As he skidded on the dirt, he hurriedly formed the cloning hand sign again. 15 duplicates sprang into being, but before they could even move were snuffed back out of existence, and Naruto took another pair of blows to the right shoulder blade and left side of the chest for his trouble. Grimacing, he set his legs and brought his arms up in a general guard. No matter how many times he saw it, Lee's unrestricted speed always astonished him. Now that Bushy Brow had removed his weights, the only time Naruto might even glimpse the older boy, unless he were lucky, would be just after receiving a punch or kick from him. He gritted his teeth as 3 more impacts landed on his back, side, and thigh, a flash of green jumpsuit accompanying them. Things had just gotten a lot harder. Unconsciously clutching her hands together, Hinata watched her favorite blonde ninja with growing concern. She'd been as surprised as anyone by Lee's last-minute restriction. Naruto had acted like it was no big deal, but it was obvious the fight hadn't been going well for him. He'd matched Lee almost blow for a long while, but she could tell he'd been struggling to keep up the whole time. When the clones had joined the fray, her hope had risen somewhat. Now, though, watching him helplessly take hit after hit, her spirits had fallen just as far. How could he possibly win now? She glanced around at the other spectators. Sai and Shino watched impassively, and Shikamaru merely looked bored as always. Tenten was fighting to keep an even face, but it was clear she was proud of her teammates' strong showing. Ino and Choji had been cheering for both sides with gusto. They were now shouting overlapping encouragements to Naruto, worry betrayed in their faces. Hinata looked over at Sakura. Surely Naruto's strong-willed Kunoichi teammate could reassure her of his inevitable victory. No good. Sakura didn't even notice her glance, her eyes rapt on the battle. She was fiercely trying to cling to her confidence in Naruto, but Hinata could see the anxiety creeping at the edges of her friend's expression. Beyond her, however, Hinata saw Kiba and Neji, smiling. Of everyone there, the 2 young men plus Akamaru appeared to be the only ones entirely unworried. She watched them exchange a knowing look with each other before turning back to the fight. Hinata blinked. Kiba and Neji, who had both fought Naruto before, Kiba and Neji, who'd both beaten the hyperactive ninja into a corner, certain that they'd won, Kiba and Neji, who'd both been stunningly defeated by a last-minute brilliant maneuver on Naruto's part, they were unconcerned. They knew what he was capable of, that no matter what he always found a way. Her faith instantly restored, Hinata turned back to her Naruto, like her friend and cousin patiently waiting for him to defy the odds once again. Naruto was dodging on instinct now, jumping when he thought another blow would come, dodging away from where he thought it would land. It wasn't working particularly well. The bumps and bruises he was quickly accumulating could attest to that. He had to figure out a way to turn this around. So he doggedly worked his way through his options. His shadow clones were practically useless now. They just got picked off the moment he created them. Most of his other ninjutsu were out, too, under the restriction. Not even evasion techniques like a substitution would help now. Lee would just track him down within a few seconds and the beating would resume in that new location. He could try to outlast Bushy Brow, wait for him to get tired, he snorted. Yeah, right. Naruto considered drawing on his feral state for about 3 seconds before angrily rejecting the idea. He was proving his own strength here, not the fox's. But where did that leave him? He wasn't nearly fast enough to actively compete in taijutsu anymore. He'd need a distraction. He thought for a moment. He could use that jutsu, that would probably work, he grimaced. No, that would probably cause a knockout, and it definitely wasn't taijutsu. And Sakura would K him for it, of course. And Hinata. He glanced over at where the spectators where Hinata stood watching, and suddenly realized that he'd be very reluctant to ever use that jutsu in her presence. He saw her look of confidence and felt his own bolstered somewhat. A savage blow to the cheekbone spun him to one knee and wrenched his attention back to the fight. Okay, assuming he managed to put together a distraction and it worked, he'd likely only get one attack off before Lee got away, and he doubted his friend would fall for the same trick twice. That meant he had to go for the knockout. He frowned. A knockout in one attack. Bushy-brow specialized in bouncing back from combat hits. There was no way Naruto could put enough force in one strike to keep him down. Unless. As a new thought occurred to him, Naruto smiled and prepared a hand sign. Rock Lee had been born without the ability to use ninjutsu or genjutsu. He also lacked any significant natural talent in his only remaining choice of taijutsu. It was only through hard work in the face of the indifference of his peers that he had advanced as far as he had achieved his dream of being a splendid ninja. That was why he had nothing but the utmost respect for Naruto Uzumaki, especially since learning about the fox. Like him, Naruto had been deemed a dropout, a loser. Like him, Naruto lacked natural talent, yet had become a fine ninja anyway. Yet Naruto had had to overcome so much more. Lee had encountered apathy in the eyes of the village. Naruto had encountered hate. Lee had built his skills from the ground up. Naruto had brought to heel a power that actively hindered his progress. Lee's sensei had been there to push him along the path of hard work and determination. Naruto had walked it shakily out of despair on his own. Naruto Uzumaki was living proof that passion, drive, and the will to never give up could overcome any obstacle, and Lee was proud to know him. Naruto had a dream even bigger than his own, to become Hokage and prove to everyone in the world, even those who hated him, just how far his passion extended. The idea struck a kindred flame in Lee's heart, and he was prepared to do anything in his power to help his friend get there. He grinned when he saw the smile on Naruto's face in passing. He has a plan. That is good. Now, let us see if it is effective. He's not really going to try shadow clones again, is he? Ino asked incredulously. Hinata heard Sakura try to defend his choice, though she did a poor job of sounding convinced herself. Hinata wasn't worried. She'd seen his smile. She knew what it meant. Here it comes, she whispered. Lee came in from behind. He knew that Naruto had formed the shadow clone hand sign and he wanted to try and interrupt him by knocking him off balance. He threw a punch at what should have been the small of Naruto's back, and something unexpected happened. Instead of landing on and bone, his fist encountered only the fabric of the long white coat Naruto wore. Because of his velocity, the vacant garment immediately wrapped around him, blinding him and restricting his arms. As he slowed his pace and fumbled with the coat, he glimpsed Naruto sliding along the ground, trying to slam into his legs. He leapt over the blonde ninja and flung off the blinding cloth in a single motion. To see a pair of shadow clones sailing toward him. Without thinking, he punched both of them in the face, causing them to dissipate in the usual fashion, but through the smoke of the demise flew two more clones. Before he could react, they each seized one of his arms, dragging him out of the air and back toward the first Naruto. Flexing his arms, he bashed these two into each other, destroying them as well, but he couldn't arrest his momentum now and there wasn't time for a mid-air maneuver. Doubtless the Naruto that had slid under him would be standing now, waiting for him. He sighed inwardly. He'd been careless, and Naruto was going to get his plan off. Still, it wasn't a particularly smart plan. The blonde ninja would have time for maybe one attack before Lee could spin and kick him across the face for his foolishness, and no matter how powerful, it took more than one hit in these conditions to put the taijutsu master out of the fight. When he felt the blow, however, his eyes bulged like dinner plates even as his pupils shrank. Secret finger jutsu, 1,000 years of pain. The real Naruto ran forward several steps, and then turned to watch his clones work. Judging the timing, he leapt into the air. He had to admit, on its own, a bare-handed secret finger wasn't that impressive or intimidating. Oh, certainly, it was excruciatingly uncomfortable, but all it really did was send its victim rocketing off away from the offending fingers. He reached the top of his jump. As he began his descent, he tucked his legs and rolled forward, picking up rotational momentum. If someone took advantage of said ballistic energy, though, Lee let out the high-pitched, screeching yelp that was the common reaction as he fired into the air like a missile straight toward Naruto. Just before he plowed into the falling ninja, Naruto extended his foot and brought it down in a blazingly fast axe kick on the back of Bushy Brow's head. His trajectory suddenly changed, but his speed actually increased by the force of the blow. Lee slammed face first into the ground hard enough not only to leave a crater in the dirt, but to bounce out of it again, coming to rest 3 feet further along. Naruto's surviving clone walked up beside him as he landed, both eyeing Bushy Brow still form carefully. Had he done it? Suddenly Lee flipped off the ground and onto his feet. Both Narutos groaned in exasperation before the original noticed something. Though Lee had resumed his fighting stance, he staggered back and forth unsteadily. This was probably because his eyes didn't focus the same direction but spun chaotically. "Well done, Naruto," he said, his voice cracking and warbling. "You have passed the test of strength. Now I need a nap." Bushy Brow abruptly gave up the fight to stay conscious and fell over backwards, plopping down on the turf. The Narutos stared slack-jawed in shock for a moment before slowly turning their heads toward each other. Suddenly they both grinned and shouted, "All right." Naruto exchanged a high five with his clone before letting it dissipate and turning to pump his fist in victory toward his spectators, all of whom came walking over. Each of them congratulated him in their own way, Sakura with a crushing bear hug, Kiba with a headlock and knuckles grinding into his hair, Shino with a simple nod, and the like. Then, as Sakura and Tenten went to assist Lee, most of the rest said the goodbyes and started to leave. Naruto gaped in surprise. Hey, what about the rest of the tests? He shouted after them. Haven't you noticed how late it is? Kiba called over his shoulder. You can get started on them tomorrow. Confused, Naruto looked up at the sky and jerked in surprise. The sun had almost dipped below the horizon. He hadn't even noticed the time fly by. Hey, Naruto, if you want to get started on the next test, you can try mine. He turned to see Shikamaru and Hinata still waiting behind him. Hinata, pink again, merely stood there pushing the tips of her index fingers together meekly. Hands in his pockets and posture sloppy, the lazy ninja smirked and continued. Lee jumped the gun. I was supposed to be first, since we figured my test would take you the most tries to pass. Naruto flashed his competitive smile. Ha, we'll see about that, he barked, falling back into his fighting posture. But Shikamaru merely raised an eyebrow. My test doesn't work like that, knucklehead, he said, sounding annoyed. Naruto hitched, frowned, and blinked in surprise. It doesn't. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and shook his head. Think about it. What would it prove if you just beat us all in combat? That you're a good fighter. One brawl is enough to see that. He smirked again. Nah, here's how my test works. I'll ask you a question. If you can answer it, you can ask me one question. You pass when you can stump me. Naruto looked incredulous. That sounds really simple. Yeah, well, coming up with anything more complicated would be too much of a drag. You ready or not? Looking determined, Naruto nodded. All right, your question's a riddle. If you learn all you can about me, I can defeat any of the most powerful ninja in the world. If you leave me behind, your choice will doom you. What am I? He gave Naruto a sly look. Well, any ideas? The other boy laughed. Of course, he exclaimed. The answer is a powerful jutsu. Nope. Naruto was stunned. What? Shikamaru looked exasperated but not at all surprised. No one jutsu can beat every ninja, he said bluntly. Then he yawned. Oh, well, try again tomorrow. And with that he ambled off. Naruto gaped in surprise once more. Wait, why can't I try again now? He yelled, irritated. Shikamaru turned his head lazily back toward the loudmouth. And listened to you rattle off random answers. I hope I don't have to tell you how much of a drag that would be. He started to walk off again, waving casually. Come find me at that ramen place you like. A new thought occurred to Naruto. Hey, what if we have missions? He shouted at the retreating form. Oh, yeah, I forgot, he called back, not even bothering to turn this time. I told the old lady about our little plan, and she put some crazy excuse in for us. The 12 of us are off duty until you pass the trials. Or fail miserably. And with that he was gone. Naruto blinked at this pleasant news, then remembered his last companion and turned to find Hinata exactly the way she'd been 5 minutes ago. Under his sudden scrutiny, she turned slightly pinker and began to fidget a bit more, playing with a tuft of grass with her foot. CC-con congratulations, NN Naruto, she finally managed to mumble out. I knew you would eep. Her voice cut off in a squeak as he whirled her off the ground in a bear hug. He gave a joyful laugh, wondering if she'd ever get used to him doing that. He stopped abruptly at the sound of a deep rumble they both knew to be his stomach. She giggled at the pathetic expression that came over his face. Then he brightened and looked her in the eye. Hey, Hinata, he began hopefully. The tips of their noses barely an inch apart, she smiled at him sweetly. He grinned. Do you want to go get some dinner? She giggled again. Auto FN, warning. Mega fluff romantic scene below. The sun had long since vanished. Naruto Uzumaki and Hinata Hyuga, both finished with their meal, sat facing each other on Ichiraku stools under the night sky. As strange as it seemed to both of them, they had never really ever had a chance to sit down and have a normal conversation. So, by mutual agreement, that's what they did. Just talked about their lives, about their hopes and fears, about their victories and the painful memories. Hinata blushed the whole time she spoke, aware that he had read everything she said in her diary 1 month prior, but he hung on every word anyway. Naruto burned slightly with the old shame he had felt then, but he quickly shoved that away. She had released him from that guilt, and if she could do that, he had no reason to hold to it himself. He also burned with anger. He had read the accounts of her father's neglect and contempt, but hearing them from her own mouth enraged him. The one thing that kept him from stomping over to give Hiashi Hyuga a piece of his mind and likely his fists was Hinata's hurried assurances that he'd laid off the criticism quite a bit in recent years. In an effort to calm him down further, she quickly changed the subject and asked him to talk for a while. He hesitated a moment, then began sheepishly. Her heart ached as he once again recounted the stories of his lonely childhood, so much like her own and yet so much more horrible. She listened with pride as he regaled her with his adventures and blushed slightly when they included her. She watched him wistfully as he spoke of his dream, his eyes gazing off into the distance of the future, his voice full of wonder and hope. Then she saw pain enter his eyes. A weight seemed to settle on his shoulders, making them sag. His voice rasped as he told her of the elder's decision, and the private dread that went with it, that he might never be accepted, that he might never be able to show the village how much he cared. It was insufferable for Hinata to see him like this. She wanted as vehemently as he had to confront those old fools who had hurt him so badly. But even more than that, she wanted to do what she had never had the courage to in all their years of loneliness. She wanted to comfort the man she loved. Reaching up, she gently placed her right hand on his cheek. Immediately he looked up at her, a question in his eyes. She smiled with all the warmth she felt in her heart and tenderly stroked his face. Her touch was refreshing, soothing, like the kiss of the wind and the smile of the sun all at once. He felt something melt within him, and knew it to be his fear. If nothing else, he would always have a place with his friends. With her, he reached up as well, but hesitated when he saw his hand. Unlike hers, his was rough and calloused, coarse and battle-worn. Such a thing had no right to touch her delicate skin. He let it drop to his side in disgust, and his gaze turned away in disgrace. Concerned, she bent her head down into the path of his eyes, seeking them with her own. When he would not meet them, she reached down with her spare hand and seized his discarded one. That jerked him back to her. He watched in wonder as she lifted his hand to her face and pressed it there. She closed her eyes and breathed a sigh of contentment at the touch. He brought up his left hand, hesitated, and mirrored her, clasping it over the soft warmth caressing his own cheek. She peeked out at him, and their eyes gazed into each other, shining as brilliantly as any of the stars overhead. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.